Okay, looks like it's normalized, so let's go ahead and get started. Again, welcome to today's CNCF webinar, Deploying and Managing Kubernetes-ready Apps with Kubeapps. My name is Ariel Jasib. I'm a founder at a company called StackPoint Cloud and a CNCF ambassador. At StackPoint, we enable users to manage cloud-native infrastructure, such as Kubernetes, Istio, Helm, as well as container workloads across multi-cloud in just minutes. So I encourage you to go check that out. Today, I want to thank you all for joining us very much this afternoon, and we want to welcome Adnan Abdul-Hussein from Bitnami, our presenter. Good to catch up with him again. I hadn't seen him in a while. We appreciate him joining us to share some of the expertise on Kubeapps with all of you today. A couple of housekeeping items just to keep in mind. During the webinar, you're not going to be able to speak, but there is a chat window down in the bottom or a QA function. Feel free to add your questions there. And as we have some natural pauses in the presentation, I'll go ahead and present them to Adnan. Additionally, today's session is being recorded and will be sent out right afterwards, along with the link to the presentation. And one more housekeeping item. I hope to see many of you at KubeCon Copenhagen next week, and I believe there's still some passes available if you haven't already secured those. So I highly encourage you to go out there and participate with a very fun and active community. So today, let me introduce the speaker. Again, his name is Adnan Abdul-Hussein. He's a software engineer at Bitnami and a core member of the Helm team. Adnan is also one of the maintainers of Bitnami's Docker images and Helm charts, and previously worked at several other cloud projects, including Bitnami Launchpads for Azure, Google, and vCloud Air. He's passionate about infrastructure, developer tools, open source software, and the possibility of time travel, which we've never chatted about. We'll have to catch up about later. He holds a BSc in computer science from the University of Bristol. And so without further ado, I'll send it over to him and let him take it over.
Thank you, Ariel. Yeah, the time travel stuff is a whole different webinar. We'll have to do that again at some point.
Yeah.
So hopefully you can all hear me okay. As Ariel said, my name's Adnan Abdul-Hussein. I'm a software engineer at Bitnami. Clearly my emoji didn't go well there, but that was supposed to be a nice little red heart emoji. Basically, I love DevOps. I love developer tools, and I love open source software. In the Kubernetes world, I'm a SIGApps. I'm one of the co-chairs of SIGApps, along with the awesome Matt Farina and Kenneth Owens. So I kind of help around there and help run the meetings, gather people to do demos, and all sorts of other fun stuff. So if you're interested in running applications on Kubernetes, more things like this, then definitely check out the SIGApps, a special interest group apps in Kubernetes. And we meet regularly at 9 a.m. Pacific time on Mondays. As Ariel also said, I'm a Kubernetes Helm and charts core maintainer there. So some of my time I spend reviewing some charts that go into the Kubernetes charts repository and working with some of the other folks on the Helm team, especially now with the Helm free proposal coming out. So as I mentioned, I work for a company called Bitnami. If you haven't heard of us, we're one of the leading providers of packaged applications on pretty much any platform, from installers that you run on your machine to VMs to cloud images that you can spin up on AWS, Google, Azure, whatever cloud platform you're using. And in the Kubernetes world, we also do quite a bit of packaging for Kubernetes. So we have a bunch of Helm charts that we've built and images, container images that we provide for that. But we're also doing a lot of other interesting stuff in different open source projects. So I mentioned what we're doing with Helm and the Kubernetes charts repository. But we have some other projects, things like sealed secrets and kubectfg, basically kind of around making it easier and more secure to deploy applications to Kubernetes. We also have Cabin, which is a kind of a UI similar to Kubeapps actually, or similar to the Kubernetes dashboard, a mobile UI for your Kubernetes cluster. So you can install the app. I think it's on Android and iOS, and you can manage your Kubernetes cluster from there, which is always interesting. We also have Kubeless, which is a serverless platform on top of Kubernetes. And what I'm here to talk to you about today, Kubeapps, which is an application dashboard on top of Kubernetes. So all of these things kind of have a general theme, all of the things that we're working on, and that theme is basically applications and making applications easier to run and manage on top of Kubernetes. So that's our main interest in the Kubernetes world there. We've worked a lot with some of the other awesome players in the Kubernetes space. So Microsoft, previously Deis with Helm, Heptio with some of the kubecfg stuff, and IBM. And we're also one of the authors of the O'Reilly Kubernetes cookbook. So what am I going to talk about today? Well, I'm going to go through a very brief, very brief, I should say, history of application management on Kubernetes, which will generally just kind of set the theme of the talk and introduce us to what Kubeapps is and why we essentially built it. Followed by a demo of Kubeapps, because you know, a webinar isn't fun without a demo. So definitely going to have a demo, and it's going to be a live demo. And finally, I'll just touch on some of the roadmap, some of the things that we have coming up for Kubeapps, and wrap up. So Kubernetes, we've gotten to a point today where I think Kubernetes is pretty easy to set up, right? I can go to something like one of the very many cloud providers to go and set up a cluster with GKE or AKS. I can even go to StackPoint Cloud and set up a cluster on pretty much any cloud provider. That's always easy to do. On my local machine, I have Minikube. I can go and easily just run Minikube start, and that goes and sets up a cluster for me. And also recently, the Docker for desktop, or Docker for Mac and Docker for Windows have added support for Kubernetes as well, or at least if you're using the beta Edge version. So it's incredibly easy to get Kubernetes up and running today and start using it. There's also a lot of different distributions that you can play with. So and some of these kind of have different strengths. So I think OpenShift, for example, it's a very good example that has a big strength in security and the way that they configure everything. It's a lot, makes your containers much more secure. So yeah, so with Kubernetes, being so easy to set up, really the problem is how you manage your applications on top of it, and that's kind of the hard part right now, right? So yeah, and I've got this meme here of YAML, because I know how much we all love YAML, right? So generally, when you're doing stuff on Kubernetes, you're probably going to have to write a fair amount of YAML, and then you're going to have to pass that from into your kubectl command line, and that's how you go and deploy stuff. Every time you want to deploy something new, you're going to have to probably copy that boilerplate YAML and just replace the image or the image version and image tag there. Or if you want to deploy a new version, you have to go and edit that bit of YAML and update that image tag. So it's a little painful to manage apps on Kubernetes right now. That said, we do have Helm, and Helm kind of helped us go from lots of YAML and kubectl to a nice simple line like Helm install whatever repository is /char, and that's similar to the experience you get with Docker. So if you haven't seen Helm before or used Helm before, it's basically a somewhat replacement for kubectl in the way you manage your applications. There's obviously a lot of good talks out there on how exactly to use Helm. I'm not going to go too deep into how it works and how you use it today. But the main idea here is that Helm has, as a package manager for apps on Kubernetes, has been really influential, and I think really useful in managing applications on your cluster. You can do all sorts of stuff with Helm. You can install charts. You can upgrade them. You can manage the whole life cycle within your cluster. With Helm, we get a huge repository of charts that we can actually go and just pick up and use straight away. So, this is an example of me doing Helm Search here to see what's available, and you can see there's just a ton of different things that I can just go and deploy right now in my cluster, and it just works. And that's kind of what we've been building out in the Kubernetes charts project. So if you go to the Kubernetes, github.com/Kubernetes/charts, you'll see all those charts being developed there. That we have a ton of contributors in that repository, and it's really great to see that be built out. So one of the things that we built quite early on was this thing called Monocular, and the reason we built it was because we wanted a way to make it easy for people to discover what charts there are in the repository, and essentially go from something like this to a nice website user interface where they can go and search for things and find out how to install them, find out the README information and versions that are available and stuff like that. So we initially called that Monocular, and we launched that, and we had that actually on Kubeapps.com, and yeah, it was just a great way to go and find out about charts. But what we were really hearing from people was that they wanted to have a way to install stuff in their cluster. So whilst it was, so Monocular was kind of a way to see the charts that are available, see information about them, but there wasn't a way to actually install them into your cluster from there. You actually had to go and copy out a Helm install command. So what we were really hearing was, this is great, but how do I get this running in my cluster, and how do I get an install button so I can go and do that? And at the same time, I think the ecosystem for applications in general has been growing quite a bit. So we've seen, obviously we worked on Kubeless, and we've been pushing that out as a serverless framework. But there's also different ways of managing applications in your cluster. One of them is KSonnet, which it's similar to a templating language for writing Kubernetes manifests, but using the JSONet language. There's also GitKube, which allows you to have a kind of Git workflow, almost like a PaaS style sort of thing, to deploy your apps on top of Kubernetes as well. So you can just Git push, kind of Heroku style, and then you get your applications get deployed to the cluster. And this is just scratching the surface. There are so many tools in this space. The other one here is the service catalog, which allows you to connect to external services that may be running somewhere else, but connect to them from within the applications running in your cluster. So, for example, if I wanted to connect to if I wanted to provision and then connect to a database in the Azure cloud, if I was using Azure, then I'd be able to use the service catalog to go and provision an Azure database for me, and then create a secret based on that for credentials to actually connect to that MySQL instance. So with all these things going on, what we decided to do was build Kubeapps, and what we essentially see Kubeapps as is an application console for your cluster. So it gives you this UI, this dashboard experience on top of all these different packaging, tooling, and things that you might want to do application specific in your cluster. So it extends on what something like the Kubernetes dashboard does, and the Kubernetes dashboard is more lower level and deals more with the kind of core resources in the Kubernetes API. But the Kubeapps takes more of an app focus on a dashboard experience and shows you your applications. So it's very easy to get started with. So you can grab the binary on GitHub. If you just go to the release page here, then you'll be able to pull that. We have binaries for Windows, Linux, and Mac. And then you can run Kubeapps up, and that will go and install everything you need in your cluster to run Kubeapps. And that comes with Helm and Tiller, or I suppose just Tiller for the server-side stuff. It comes with Kubeless installed, comes with sealed secrets, the Kubeapps components, and and then an Nginx English controller to be able to expose that. And as I said, it's this kind of it's a complete application delivery environment. So this is something that you would install, on a new cluster that you've provisioned, and it removes that empty cluster syndrome that it has. It gives you a console UI where you can browse and deploy from a range of different applications, same ones that you see in Helm, but also go and manage Kubeless functions on top of that, and also now more recently go and provision service instances and bindings from the Kubernetes service catalog. Okay, enough talking. Let's see some WordPress. Given that WordPress is the demo, sorry, the to-do app of all cloud native things, right? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my terminal here. And what I've done is I've pre-downloaded the Kubeapps binary here. I'm just going to show you where you can go and get it again. So if you go to github.com/kubeapps/kubeapps, and if you go to the releases page here, we can grab the latest binary. This Darwin is the one for OS X, and Linux and Windows are there as well. So I've already pulled this Darwin one. And then I'm going to go back to my terminal here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you the output of help here. So there's a couple commands available here to me. One is dashboard. So this opens the dashboard once I've installed it. I can easily uninstall everything that Kubeapps installs by just running Kubeapps down. This is help I'm putting out. And I run Kubeapps up when I want to go and get started, when I want to install everything. And then there's a version command as well. So I'm going to go and run Kubeapps up here. So this is going to be pretty quick, especially since I've already installed this. And it goes and prints out everything that it's gone and installed. You can see that all of it is already there because I haven't actually changed anything. And I can just verify this if I run. Sorry, so K is my alias. It really just means kubectl. And if I just set the namespace here to Kubeapps, I can see all the Kubeapps stuff has been deployed and is running. So now that I've verified that, I can just run Kubeapps dashboard here, and this will open up the dashboard for me. So what this command does is it's proxying to that Nginx English controller, which we set up as a cluster IP service, so that by default you can't connect to it from outside the cluster. But with this tunnel, I can go and connect to that pod directly and access the Kubeapps dashboard UI here. So you'll see that I have a couple of stuff that I've already pre-installed in my cluster already. But I'm just going to go, just ignore these for a second. I'm just going to go and deploy something. So what I'm going to go and deploy is, let's go and deploy WordPress. So here, this is similar. If you've seen Monocular or Kubeapps Hub before, this will be familiar to you. You can see the information about the chart. So this is just a README from the chart. I can copy and paste this Helm install command if I want to. I can go through the different versions here, and I can even go as far back as 0815 if I want to, or even further back. This one really goes on. But if I go to the latest here, I can also see what version of the app I'll be installing here. So this is WordPress 4.9.5. I can see, I can get the link to the home address here. I can find out any related links as well here. In the README, because we pulled the README, we can just grab kind of all of the information that you get from GitHub, and you can kind of see how exactly I'd want to configure this. I have all the configuration options here available to me to see. And I can always refer back to this when I want to do something with this. So it's always good to have the README here. But I'm going to go and deploy this in my cluster, and I can click this button here that says deploy using Helm. And here I have a screen where I can I can set the name here for my deployment. I can set the version that I want. So again, I can choose a different version if I wanted a different one that is than what I selected in the previous screen. And then I also have the values.yaml here. So I can go and make the changes that I want when I go and deploy this. This is just the default values.yaml that you get from the chart. But I could go and make some changes like disable persistence if I wanted to, or change the maybe I can change something here. Let's change the blog name. Let's call it Hello CNCF, and then we'll call this CNCF WordPress. So this is going to take a couple minutes to deploy. Well, it just loads here. Try and refresh this.
While we're waiting, Don, I have a question for you if you want to tackle it.
Sure. Yep.
So Manikandan, I think I pronounced that correct, as is Kubeapps production ready?
Is Kubeapps production ready? That is a really great question because I was going to address it at the end. So one of the problems right now that we see with production readiness is that if you wanted, usually you'd want to expose this over some sort of domain, so it would be easier to access rather than having to run the Kubeapps dashboard and proxy it that way. So it'd be nice to have a way to access that externally or over a VPN or something. But the problem with that is then you quite easily give access to Kubeapps to a whole range of people. So one of the things that we've been actively working on this last couple of weeks is integration, authentication, and authorization using the cluster's RBAC, role-based access control. So what we're trying to do is leverage the Kubernetes role-based access control and have people log in with a bearer token, and then everything they do within Kubeapps uses that bearer token. Every API request uses that bearer token, and so they can only do. So a user would only be able to do what they have permissions to do, and those permissions can be granted by a cluster operator or administrator. Does that so? So with that, I think that's that change we expect to happen before KubeCon. So we hope that that kind of is the thing that will make it a lot more accessible and also a lot easier to open externally within, again, either a VPN or even externally even further than that. So to answer that question more briefly, I think right now probably not production ready, but within a few weeks, I think this would definitely be production ready.
Okay, great. I have a couple more questions, but I'll let you dive back into it and we can revisit.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not going to wait for this WordPress instance to fully get up and running here, especially since I have some other stuff that's deployed and I don't know if I'm going to run out of resources here. So I'm actually going to go and delete this. But as you can see, I deployed this WordPress and I get a nice thing here telling me that it's deploying. I can see that my deployments, I've got, I'm waiting for one to be ready for both the MariaDB and WordPress deployment. I even have a load balancer service pending. This would be, if I was using a cloud platform, then I'd have an external IP provision for me in this case because it's a load balancer type. I'm using Docker for Mac desktop right now, so that's not actually going to happen. But if I was, then I'd be able to see it here, and I'd also be able to see the URL here once that's available to me. But I'm going to go ahead and delete this for now. Whoops. But I did promise some WordPress, so I will show you this one that I deployed earlier. And I'll just grab the URL here so you can quickly see it. So as you can see, I've got this WordPress running. And again, this is all local, running on my Docker for Mac Kubernetes cluster. The other interesting thing about this particular WordPress is that you'll notice that I don't actually have a MariaDB deployment here. And what I've done is I've actually replaced it out with something from the service catalog. So that leads me into the next thing that I wanted to show. And if I click on this tab here, service instances, you'll see that once it loads, I can see I have two instances in my cluster here, and I have WordPress DB and WordPress DB2. And if I go into this one here, I can see the status of it, and I can see what it is. So I can see it's an Azure database for MySQL. So this is using so the service catalog has been installed in this cluster, and I'm using the Open Service Broker for Azure Service Broker. So that allows me to connect to my Azure Azure Cloud and provision databases for me. And then what I've done here is I've created a binding that I've used in my chart, and you can see these are the credentials for my MySQL. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go and provision a new one to show you how this works. So here, once I click the provision new button, I can see all the classes that I have from every broker in my cluster. Right now, as I said, I only have the Azure Open Service Broker for Azure broker installed, but so I can only see the Azure services. But if I had another broker, one example is a cluster may have one for a cloud platform, but then another one for local services. So you may want to have a service broker that installs a Helm chart, for example. That could be useful for testing. So I could have a Helm MySQL chart, Helm MySQL service here, and I could go and deploy that one that way. But for this demo, I'm just going to go and deploy another MySQL one here. And so here I have the plans for each service catalog thing. So so when you install a service broker, and if I just go to the service brokers page here, you can see that I have the OSBA running here, and this is the URL it's running on. So it's all running inside this cluster. So when you go and add more brokers to your cluster, to your Kubernetes cluster, to the service catalog, they'll automatically show up in Kubeapps because it just uses the Kubernetes API to discover them. And the brokers themselves will configure what you actually see here. So each service, each icon and stuff, or each plan that gets shown up here, all come from the service broker and the actual catalog that it presents. So I'm going to go and deploy another basic 50 database here, and I'm just going to call this WordPress DB3. And I have some default JSON parameters here, which are not the most secure parameters. I'm basically giving this access to any IP address and disabling the firewall essentially, and disabling SSL enforcement. But hey, it's a demo. So I click submit here, and this. So we can see that this one is now being provisioned asynchronously. So if I click details here, I can see that same thing again. I can even create bindings as it's being provisioned, but the bindings won't actually, and if I just do this here, so it says add binding, and I'm just going to give it the default name, which is db3-binding. Once that shows up, expand. Actually, if I refresh, we'll get the status. We'll see that binding cannot begin because the reference service instance is not ready. So as this becomes ready, that's when this binding will actually be fulfilled. But for now, I have this other DB here that I'm going to use, which doesn't have any bindings. So I'm going to create another one here, DB2 binding, and we'll see that this one will get configured straight away. So we can see the binding request is in flight. If we refresh again, hopefully that gets done. Yep, injected bind result. And we can see that I have the secrets here for this one. So now I can go and deploy another WordPress instance here. So I can go and find WordPress here. Click deploy. Call this WordPress 2, or WordPress 3, I guess. And then it was a WordPress DB2 binding that I wanted to use. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the charts in the upstream repo don't play well yet with the service broker. So what you have to do is kind of read the secret and copy these values across right now. We're hoping that obviously this user experience gets improved as we go along, and ideally, and I know for some of the Bitnami charts, we're working on integrating deeper with the service catalog, so you can just point directly to a binding, or even have the binding be created for you. So I'm just looking for where I need to put the password here in this wall of YAML. Okay, external database. So I'm just going to copy and paste these values across here. And the other thing I'm going to do is disable the dependent MariaDB chart that this chart automatically deploys. So I'm just going to turn off this. And then I'm going to click submit here. I'll just wait for this to come up. Zoom tends to slow things down a bit, so I have to sometimes refresh. So this one's deploying, and again, as you can see, there's no extra MariaDB service here because I'm using the one from the service catalog. So while that's happening, I'm going to go and show you the Kubeless part of Kubeapps. So if I click on functions here, I can see a list of functions that I have in my cluster, which currently I don't have any, so that's why we're not seeing anything. But I can go and click deploy new function here, and this kind of fills in a generated name for me, and I can choose the runtime that I want here. So I'm just going to stick to Node.js 6 as a default here, and then I'm going to click submit, and this is going to load the functions UI, and it's loaded. It's given me kind of a sample function to play with here as it deploys this out, and then I can go and make changes to it. And now that it's deployed, and the logs load here. Yep, I can see exactly that function that's been there, and I can go and test it here. So I have a test function part here, and I can click test, then I get hello world printed out here. The cool thing about this is I can actually go and develop this function out here, so I can use this as an editor and actually modify and play with my function. So I can change this here to hello world free, or let's do hello CNCF. Click save, and that's going to go and redeploy. And once it's deployed, you can see that it's loaded this new function. It's printed out here, and if I refresh this here, I get hello CNCF. You can obviously do more interesting things here. One of the things I can do is there's if I go to the app repository screen here, I can add chart repositories. And one of the things I can do is I know there happens to be a repo, a charts repo that contains some functions. So I'm just going to add this functions repo here. And this is actually similar to what you do with Helm repo add. So Helm repo add takes two arguments, a name and a URL for that repository, and I can just enter that here, and that will go and add that. And once I've done that, I should be able to see that repo added here. Yep. So I've got my crypto chart here. So I'm going to go and deploy this. Just call it crypto. It doesn't have any value, so I'm just going to click submit here. This is going to deploy this function. So I can even deploy functions as Helm charts, and that's kind of neat. And then if I go to the functions tab here, I can see my function show up here. So let's load this crypto one. Let's wait for it to deploy. While that's deploying, I'm going to switch back to what we were looking at earlier. And sorry for the jumping around a little bit, but we'll go back to this WordPress and see if it's been deployed. It hasn't yet. And I may be running out of resources on my cluster. So, okay, this one got deployed. Okay, so this one, the reason why I want to show you this one is just to quickly show you one that takes a JSON kind of argument. So I'm gonna change this to a post here. I'm gonna put crypto, and let's just find out Bitcoin as an example. If I click test, I get a price of Bitcoin which has gone down, $9,362.88 US. Obviously, this function isn't that useful because it's just calling out to another API, but it's kind of a nice example of how you can deploy a function along with a chart. And if I go and delete this chart now, which is here, that will also go and delete the function that was there as well. Just going to go ahead and clean up some resources here. Let's see if this is still deploying. WordPress seems to be a bit beefy when I'm on Zoom, and it just ends up taking ages to deploy. So the other thing I wanted to show you is how you might add one of your own repositories to Kubeapps, and how you might want to deploy, one of your own apps. So I don't know if you've heard of Chart Museum, but Chart Museum is a pretty awesome project that allows you to easily spin up one of your own Helm chart repositories. And thankfully, there's a chart in the stable repository for Chart Museum, so we can find it here. And so it basically allows you to deploy your own private chart museum, and it's a really easy way to serve charts. So I've got this chart museum instance running here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add it to Kubeapps. So because this is in my cluster and I'm not on GKE or anything, I don't have an external IP, but I can access it from within the cluster using the service discovery. So I'm copying the name of the service here, and I'm going to go to my app repository screen here, and I'm going to add a new repository and call it Chart Museum. And I'm just going to type this in here, and it's in the default namespace. So I'm just going to add that .default there. We'll install that, and after a couple of seconds, I should see the chart from this repo. Let's see if it's there yet. Yep, here it is. So this is an app I've been working on for a friend of mine called Sean Bean. And as you can see, sorry, just go back here. As you can see, I can see all the information of it. I can see it's from my own Chart Museum repo that I just added. I pushed this version today, 0.10, so let's go ahead and take a look what that looks like. I'll just call it Sean Meme here. And we can see that it's currently set as a cluster IP. In order for me to access it, I'm going to change this to node port. It's pointing to the 100 tag, so that all looks good. I'm just go ahead and deploy this here. So we can see this one's deploying. Hopefully this spins up faster than WordPress. Speaking of WordPress, let's see how that's doing. And it's still deploying. Okay, this one definitely spin up faster than WordPress. So I'm going to go and access this over the node port, which is this port here. And I've got my app for Sean Bean. I'm going to have to tell you to ignore this URL here. It points to something else which doesn't actually point to this, so that's not going to work. But if you do manage, well, actually, no, this is running on my local cluster, so there's no way for you to access this. Oh well. So I'm just going to add a meme here. You can see this all works. I can create memes and it shows up. If I refresh, it's still there after a while. But I actually have a new version of this app that I want to deploy as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click upgrade here. And actually first I need to go and push the chart for this. So I'm going to just open a new tab here, and hopefully you can see this. I'm going to zoom in a bit here. Let's go to my Sean Meme repo here. And so I have a Helm chart in here cultural meme. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to update the values.yaml, the default ones here, to point to the 2.0.0 tag. And I'm also going to update the chart YAML to just bump this version and bump this to 2.0 as well. And then I'm gonna use the Helm push command, and this command comes from Chart Museum. So it's a plugin. It's a Helm plugin developed by the folks who are developing Chart Museum, which allows you to easily push to Chart Museum repositories. So just pass in the chart there, and then the name of my repo, which is Chart Museum. So that's going to push 030 there. So now going back to Kubeapps, I'm going to just jump over here, and by default, Kubeapps will refresh your repositories every hour. But if you ever want to do it manually, if you just push something and you want to update it quickly, you can just go to here and you can click refresh. And it doesn't give you much feedback right now, but that will actually go and refresh. And if we go to my app here and I click upgrade, I'll see that 0.2.0 has popped up already for me. And we can see that the changes that I made. So I changed this tag to 200. That's fine. I'm just going to go and click upgrade here. Oh, I wanted to change that to a node port. So we'll just click submit, and we'll wait for this is deploying now. So we'll just wait for this to get up and running again. I think it's the same node port 32473. Yeah, 32473. Okay, so now this is deployed, and let's see if it's worked. No, may take some time to actually refresh this. Aha, here we go. So now I have this newer version of the app, which allows me to do a different meme, and I can put here one does not simply update or upgrade an application, is what I said before. And after a while, I get that meme showing up as well. Let me make this bigger so you can actually see the memes. So yeah, so this is how you'd manage one of your own applications in Kubeapps, right? You might want to use something like, oops, that's a little bit big. You might want to use something like Chart Museum. You may have another application repository, a chart repository service. You might be using something like App Registry or the Quay.io App Registry, or Artifactory, which also supports Helm repositories, or even just using S3 or basic HTTP. And you just add those chart repositories in the same way in this app repositories tab. You can see by default, these are the three that Kubeapps comes with: the incubator, stable, and service catalog repository. But yeah, you can pretty easily add your own. And now finally, let's see if WordPress is ready. And it's not. But I think this one that I deployed earlier kind of proves that it does eventually work when Zoom isn't using up most of my CPU.
Very cool stuff. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to jump into a couple of questions. Unless, do you have a couple other slides that you want to go through?
I actually have one more slide that I wanted to get through. I'm going to skip over this one for now. But if you're interested, if you have slides later, this basically is just an architecture diagram of how the service catalog works. It kind of goes through what we showed in the UI there. But I quickly wanted to just go over what the roadmap is for Kubeapps, both for in next week, KubeCon, and also beyond that. So one of the things that, as I said, we're kind of working on pretty actively right now is the authentication and authorization piece. So essentially being able to leverage the Kubernetes RBAC and have these bearer tokens that you can go and log in with. And then you can only do things within your namespaces or within whatever roles that your administrator has given you. The other thing that's coming pretty soon as well, in the next release actually, is support for authenticated chart repos. So if you're using something like Artifactory or Chart Museum and you've set up, basic auth, or I think S3 allows you to use an authorization header with an AWS S3 protocol header. You can, with this new feature, you'll be able to add that to each request to the chart repository, so that it will be able to go and download the index and download your charts normally as if it was public. So if you have private repositories that you want to access through Kubeapps, then that's definitely going to be available. We're looking to integrate with kind of more awesome packaging tools. I think, as I mentioned earlier, you know, the ecosystem for applications are growing quite a lot, and we're seeing a lot of different ways of packaging things, a lot of different ways to deploy to Kubernetes, and we'd like to see if we can integrate with more things and you know, kind of have Kubeapps be just a really nice way to manage all sorts of different packaging systems. So if you're working on something, or if you know you're interested in helping out there, then we'd love to have that help. Deeper integration with charts and service catalog. So I kind of mentioned what I was doing when I was deploying that WordPress was I was having to copy over the secrets across. So it's a little bit painful, or quite a lot painful, I suppose. And as I said, like some of the Bitnami charts that we're working on are going to hopefully make this a lot easier, and hopefully more of the upstream charts in the charts repository will have native support for the service catalog as the service catalog itself, you know, kind of gets out of alpha and more into beta, or eventually becomes GA, I suppose, and is used by more folks. This other idea that we had is kind of a nice, cool idea, I think. If you, with the Kubeapps up command, which allows you to, you know, it sets everything up in your cluster, it'd be really cool if we could have a way to figure out what cloud you're on, and then also install the appropriate service broker for your cloud. So as soon as you go to the dashboard, kind of like what I showed today, you already have the Azure broker, or the Google broker, or the AWS broker already set out, so you can actually go and start using stuff without having to install that manually as a cluster operator. Because right now I had to do that behind the scenes previously. So that'd be a really nice thing to have as well. Yeah, I think that's it. I'm happy to answer questions. So you can obviously find out more information on kubeapps.com. I'm also on the Kubeapps channel. We're all on the Kubeapps channel in the Kubernetes Slack, so you can obviously grab us there as well. And you can also grab me on the GitHubs, the Twitters, the Slacks, right, directly if you wish, at Pridonis, if you can remember how to spell that. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, it's on the screen, so write it down. And I'm sure we'll include it out when we send out the emails. So we have a lot of questions, and I'm going to try to group them as best as possible. And so let me start with one. How does Kubeapps, the CLI, find your Kubernetes cluster? And I think that might be related to Larry Zhang's question about does Kubeapps support other cloud platforms other than Azure? And I see that Sri Da also encountered like an issue as he was trying to stand up Kubeapps while you were chatting. So.
Okay. Yeah. So the way Kubeapps finds your cluster is the same way that kubectl does. So if you've configured your cluster and you're using kubectl, then you should have no problems running Kubeapps. It essentially underneath uses the client Go library to do all that. So that should just work. But obviously, if you're having issues, then feel free to go to the GitHub repository and create an issue for a particular cloud. We've tested it on AKS, which is Azure's Kubernetes service. We've tested it on GKE, and we actually tested it on Minikube and Docker for Mac desktop. So we haven't tested it everywhere, but as long as the APIs are available, you know, things like the kind of bare minimum that Kubeapps needs right now is really just 1.8, Kubernetes 1.8 with support for cron jobs, CRDs, for the many things that it installs, and also the service catalog if you're using that. But as long as it supports those things, it should really work.
Awesome, great. Shrita, thanks you for pointing him to the GitHub instructions. I'm going to try it again. What's the relationship between Monocular and Kubeapps? Can they be used together? That's an anonymous question.
Okay, yeah, interesting question. So, so the reason we kind of built Kubeapps is because As I said, we kind of started off with Monocular, and we had that as kind of the initial Kubeapps. It's now actually the Kubeapps hub, and we still deploy Monocular. But the problem we were having is people were asking us for support for managing Helm charts and clusters and stuff like that. So we added that support actually to Monocular initially. So there is a way to deploy Monocular in your cluster, and you can actually go and add your own repositories and see charts in that and deploy them. The issue we were having is that the experience was, and if I just go to hub.kubeapps.com here, the experience really was built around this kind of public hub where you can browse and view different versions, and so you can see like it's with like the banner and stuff. We were having to do a lot of stuff with feature flags to enable and disable different modes, right? Because obviously in the public version on this website, we don't want people deploying apps through that. You should just see the Helm install command and be able to copy that. But obviously when you're running that inside your cluster, and you want to see the deploy button and stuff. So there was it was just getting a little bit complicated to manage both user experiences within one code base. So that's kind of really why we chose to split off. And since that, I think what we have with Kubeapps today is kind of diverged quite a bit and changed quite a bit. And I think the experience is generally a lot better than what we could have if we had stuck to the old Monocular code base.
Yeah, it looks good. A little bit about compatibility. Where does Kubeapps work? What Kubernetes distributions can you install it on?
So as I mentioned, it works on Minikube, Docker for Mac for testing. It works on GKE. It works on AKS. I believe it works on AWS clusters. If you're installing with COPS, or I haven't tested with the new EKS service. I think that's still in private beta. I'm not 100% sure about whether it works with Kubeless. Sorry, not Kubeless. OpenShift. I believe Kubeless does actually work on OpenShift, but I'm not 100% sure that some of the other components that we're using in Kubeapps on OpenShift. There is generally a problem with OpenShift with a lot of the charts from the upstream repo tend to not work there, just because of some of the constraints that OpenShift has in terms of security. But obviously, if you would installing charts from your own repo and you already were deploying on top of OpenShift, that would work fine in general. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure if Kubeapps works on there. I don't think we've tested it. Yeah, I'm not. So I think it really depends. I think in a lot of cases it does work. We just haven't been able to test all the scenarios. But obviously, if you do find issues in a particular distribution, then we'd love to hear about it and see if we can do something about that.
Yeah, as someone who spends a fair amount of time exploring or testing solutions on different versions of Kubernetes and clusters on providers, I can totally attest to the challenges of the matrix, the test matrix. Cool. Is Kubeapp open source? What is the license level?
Oh yes, yeah, it's completely open source, and I believe the license is Apache 2.0. So and also I think pretty much every component that it bundles is also open source. So Tiller, obviously Helm and Tiller are open source. The service catalog is open source. Kubeless is open source. So yeah, all of this great stuff is open source, and you can find all of the it's all in one repo, Kubeapps/Kubeapps. And you can see the issues and pull requests. So yeah, if you have contributions, we would gladly accept it.
Okay, a little bit on the platform compatibility question. You hinted a little bit at AWS. Our offerings, is it compatible with offerings from the service catalog from DynamoDB and Redshift from AWS?
So we haven't actually been able to test a broker for AWS yet, and I think the issue of that was that there wasn't a clear open source broker for AWS. There is a repository for one, and I think it uses the Red Hat's automation broker on top of that, which I believe runs on OpenShift, and I think that's how you can get access to AWS services on OpenShift. but we haven't had a chance to see if that integration actually works with Kubeapps yet. And I think that would definitely be a next step, just to see if that works, and if not, can we get it to work? So yeah, I definitely like to try that out at some point. But yeah, I believe the only open source broker for AWS is the one that builds on top of the automation broker from Red Hat.
Okay. All right, we have about 2 minutes left. I'm gonna try to run through some of these. Top down, Bitnami used to restrict external access to PHP MyAdmin. We're gonna go very WordPress specific here for a few, in PHP. Does Kubeapp dashboard have any security restrictions around accessing things like PHP and MyAdmin?
That's an interesting question. Off the top of my head, I believe that the chart and container image for WordPress doesn't include PHP MyAdmin, unlike the VMs and cloud images that we have. I think those do include PHP MyAdmin. So that sounds like more of a question for the cloud images. But for the containers and the Kubernetes version of WordPress, I believe if you wanted to have access to PHP MyAdmin, you might have to go and install that some other way. The nice thing about the way we deploy MariaDB here is, well, in this case, I don't have. I'm using the service catalog instance, but we essentially just use the chart from a stable repo. So we're just using this chart, and with this chart, when you install it, you get a service for MariaDB. And you can just connect to that service with the credentials that you give. So if you wanted to deploy a PHP MyAdmin separately to that and have that over a cluster ID or node port, that would be fairly easy to do. You just need to give it the right service name to connect to via the Kubernetes service discovery through PHP MyAdmin. So I would say you'd probably want to deploy that separately to WordPress and not have that bundled in the WordPress deployment.
Okay, I'm going to have two more. One's a feature request, and then we have a couple of questions that are very WordPress specific, and I'm going to encourage them to reach out to you on other channels to explore those. So the feature request is for more descriptive configuration for configuring Kubeapps for beginners, ergo to fix issues with kubectl configs, and that's from Shriek, who had the issue with installation a little bit ago. And then the last one, which hopefully maps to go reach you on social media channels, is why is your Twitter handle name Pridonius?
Wow. So I'll tackle that first question first. So as far as configuration options, I've created an issue somewhere in the issue queue here, I think, where I start going through some of the different common customizations. So I've started tracking some of the common customizations that people want to make with Kubeapps, so that we can start thinking about how to make this more custom when you're doing Kubeapps up. So that might be, if you're interested in configuring some things, I would say if you can go to issue 228 in the repo, you can add a comment there and tell us what you're configuring and see, and then we can see if we can do something about that. And as for the second question, it's fairly nerdy, but Pridonius is a character in Doctor Who. And I'm a huge Doctor Who fan, as is obvious by this mug I'm drinking out of as well.
Awesome. And on that note, I can't imagine it any other better way. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Again, look for the slide deck and a link to the video in your email. Hope to see many of you next week at KubeCon Copenhagen, and also we'll be back next Tuesday for another webinar from the CNCF. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.